Third segment of today's show, guys. We always start with Michigan Panic Meter. My panic meter has not changed at all. I will not be changing it even if Bill O'Brien leaves. I could change it if, of course, the new hire blows at OC. If Bill O'Brien, that's the only thing. But right now, I'm in total gray, which means I am completely calm, no panic. Everything's groovy. How about you, Spencer?
Give me an example of the new hire blowing. Like, what of all the names we listed off, what's the one where you're like, oh nope, I'm dipping into the light gray instead of the
maybe
dark
Joe Philbin. Maybe Joe Philbin.
Frank Reich, maybe. You're not a big
Man,
Frank
who's
Reich
a
guy.
coach that I really think is a slapdick?
Mine would be if I jokingly
Cliff Kingsbury. All right, he got hired by Washington, but I think Cliff Kingsbury is nothing better than just a good-looking dude who keeps lucking into good jobs. They hired Cliff Kingsbury. I would be at least in the white. I would move 2 notches in the panic.
I joked about Ken Dorsey. I think that would be mine. That would be mine if the Buckeyes hired. I'm basically in the Scarlet with the Ken Dorsey hire with the Browns. So there you go. If you're interested in that take, I'm going to join you in the dark gray. I said I would based off of Jim Harbaugh leaving and just recent events. By the way, we're back to the normal Michigan panic meter. So this is Ohio State's level of panic.
Yes.
I want to make sure everybody understands this isn't, I know, for fun. Last week we did Michigan's level of panic because fans seem to be losing their minds over Jim Harbaugh leaving and taking his coaches with him, which is pretty normal for anybody.
Calling him a traitor, that's really good. 3 weeks after winning a national title, not that I noticed.
He's a traitor, but it's also Ward Manuel's fault, and it's just getting mad at everybody and all very butthurt after, hey, it's been what, less than a month since you won the national championship, and this is how you feel already. So things are going well in Ann Arbor. That's all I know.
Now, things are going well with the Big Ten and the SEC as they announced in the last week here that they have formed a joint advisory committee. And just the release saying that they are forming a joint advisory committee, which, to be fair, has nothing to do with legal weed in Ohio. Just so we're clear on that. This is the joint is the joining of the SEC and the Big Ten, and it's being hailed as this, pinnacle moment, as this, I believe it was Paul Feinbaum, SEC Network, said this could be an inflection point for college football and college athletics. And while there are very valid reasons that this thing, and you're going to speak to that in a moment, why this thing is coming to fruition, it is very early to take a victory lap. And I remember when the Big Ten and the Pac-12 had their their deal together, the alliance, and what it ended up in was the death of the Pac-12. I don't think that's going to happen here. But the point was, when that came out, everyone's like,
that was so funny though.
It's the alliance. The alliance. They're here to overpower the SEC. And what happened was
the Big Ten just absorbed the Pac-12.
while the Pac-12 was sleeping, the Big Ten came in and knocked up their wives. Okay, so let's be very careful.
That's a great analogy
about having that conversation about how special this is.
They broke bread together.
They broke bread together,
and the Big Ten
broke
the
bed
Pac-12
together.
gave them a key to their house. It's like, you can stay anytime. Come on over. We'll watch football together. And then they overstayed their welcome and stuck in the middle of the night. Yeah, and laid with their wives. Yes.
The Pac-12 was watching football downstairs and like, where did my wife and the Big Ten go? Where did they go? Well, I'll just wait for them to come down. Like 20 minutes later, both are sweaty. Oh, sorry, we had to hang up a picture upstairs. Oh yeah, something was getting nailed. It wasn't the picture into the wall.
Sounds like a great lane for some adult movies out there.
Yeah,
there's been plenty that have started that way.
You know what? College football erotic memoirs. Who says no?
Hey, they gotta find more ways to make money, right? That may be the new lane.
So you kind of have been reading up a little bit on one of the reasons this could be coming together, and involves a college football playoff.
Well, real quick, I want to go to the statement that they put out too, because just the and listen, it's fair because we like to have the debates about what's the best conference in college football, and it's largely considered the SEC. And then there's this whole ESPN's SEC bias is showing that was the argument when FSU got left out this year and all this different stuff. So it's funny because it's usually the answer is almost always the Big Ten and the SEC are the two best conferences in college football. And so this has kind of been the long-standing thing of there's been the standoff between the two where okay, the SEC is adding Texas and Oklahoma. The Big Ten is adding USC and Oregon and Washington, and now they're from the East Coast to the West Coast, spanning the country. So it's kind of been a standoff between the two. And now they're finally kind of embracing each other and saying, okay, and the tea leaves have kind of pointed to it for a while, like this is going to just become two mega conferences and everybody else is just kind of out there on their own, and that's what college football is going to become. And this, I think this merger, this forming of a committee, a joint advisory committee, sort of speaks to that happening down the line at some point, which is the sort of the initial reaction here. But I think what also is just funny about the statement and that whole idea is the fact that it basically, like, Greg Sankey, the SEC, and Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, they basically just like shit on the other conferences that are in college football. Like some of the statements in this, they said there was like this whole thing about like, oh, in recent court decisions, pending litigation, blah, blah, blah. It has compelled the two conferences to take a leadership role in developing solutions for a sustainable future to college sports. So they're just kind of like crowning themselves as like we are the gods of college football, and not only college football, but college sports. The future of college sports rests in our hands. And then later, like in the exact wording of Tony Petitti's statements, where he's basically like, there's no question that the voices of our two conferences are integral to the governance and other reform efforts of college sports. Like they clearly are just like, who gives a rip about these other conferences? We are the kings. We get to make all the decisions. And they're just kind of like how Dan Gilbert said that LeBron crowned himself the self-proclaimed king. They're self-proclaiming themselves the kings of college sports. No one's going to argue with it. They're basically right. Like those two conferences are king. But it's just funny to hear the conferences basically finally admit, like, yeah, we kind of rule the roost here, and the rest of you are just kind of there in the background. I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, and I think if you look, other conferences have tried in the last like 5 years have tried power plays. Jim Phillips declining to vote on the playoffs or voting no on specific iterations of the playoffs.
Played his conference in the end.
It really did, and inevitably, I do think not playing the game a little bit smarter is going to cost him the best teams in his conference. I think it's a matter of time before you see a lot of those teams kind of divvied up. But listen, I do think the SEC and the Big Ten being in lockstep can only help college athletics immensely.
I agree.
And to the extent that they use their power always concerns me because I don't trust power, especially when it comes in college athletics where power has been abused for so long. We've covered that on previous shows. I think the NCAA is a joke. I think college leaders to some degree have been feckless on this, but the SEC and Big Ten, this could have a huge impact. Can I also say something, though? There are no other details. They have no other details on what this is going to look like, how they're going to align, what they're going to align on, where they're going to use their power for, whether it's a voting block like previous alignments have had, like the Alliance, things like that. So there's a part of me that wonders if this is a scare tactic by the SEC and the Big Ten to say, get in losers, we're doing butt stuff. Like either join the bandwagon or get the fuck out of our way. There's a significant part of me that thinks that this is hey, if you want to be cool, if you want to exist in 15 years, this is your moment.
Get on board.
Yeah. So like there's a big part of me that thinks that this is what this is. I hate though. And this is where like Paul Feinbaum's the GOAT. Like he is fantastic. I hate big sweeping emotional statements that are not levied
we talked about it last show.
Reality.
Yeah.
And so to call this and say this could be an inflection point. Yes, it could. It could be another kind of meaningless thing because they really haven't set the parameters of what this is going to look like. So it's an idea that could become something. It could also, like most things in college football leadership, become nothing. Also, and this could very well be just a front.
How many inflection points are we allowed in like, because
we have one every month.
NIL was an inflection point.
Yeah.
Now the transfer portal was an inflection point. Now the SEC plucking Oklahoma and Texas was an inflection point. The Big Ten absorbing the Pac-12 was an inflection point. Now this is an inflection point. Like, okay, I think at some point we just have to admit that the inflection point happened a while ago, And this is now just the next phase of the change. The thing you mentioned earlier, though, with in relation to some of the big things that they're really highlighting here with this sort of joint committee, I saw that they did an interview with Yahoo Sports, Sankey and Petiti did, and a lot of it centered around the future of the college football playoff, which I kind of forgot that they signed basically for the length of the current contract that they have with ESPN for the college football playoff. They signed for the 12-team playoff to exist for the next 2 years. So this upcoming year and then the year following, and that's when the TV contract with ESPN also ends. And so they don't have anything beyond that. And leading up to this year's playoff, they were supposed to vote on extending that and figuring out like what the playoff looked like beyond 2026. And it sounds like, I don't know which conference it was, but one of the conferences basically voted, let's table this for another discussion. And I think this is probably what spurred some of this, the Big Ten and the SEC taking a lead on, listen, we're going to start doing this thing and figuring out how this governance looks and what this thing looks like moving forward, because we got to start getting on board and not just having different conferences that think different things or have different needs for their own group of people. Like, we all just got to kind of get on the same page. And so the college football playoff, I think, is maybe what spurred a lot of this, because they want, and to be clear, like Petiti and Sankey both said, we are both on board with moving the college football playoff forward and advancing it to sort of into the format that we're embracing here moving forward as well. But we need everybody else to kind of be on board with that as well. So I think that's interesting, because as much as we were saying here, like, oh, 12-team playoff, what's that going to look like? This is the future of college football. We don't actually know beyond 2026 what it's going to look like. I think, for what it's worth, there are discussions being had with ESPN to extend the TV deal, and then that could obviously mean that this conversation comes to a head and it all gets resolved and all that anyway. But I think the college football playoff seems to be one of the biggest fuelers behind why the SEC and the Big Ten are sort of teaming up and saying, we're going to take the lead on trying to move our sport, or this sport of college football, but also all sports forward, and making sure that we're making decisions that are financially smart and benefit everybody. And so we're not like all over the place with the decision-making process, like it seems like they tend to be at times. Like you mentioned, the ACC saying, we don't want to expand the playoff. Like, they want everybody to be on the same page with this stuff.
Do you think the panic tone that continues to exist in college football is good for college football?
From fans or from?
No, just your interpretation. Do you think this whole thing, the way they've reacted to NIL and the portal, and every month is a new inflection point, do you think that this is good for college football?
I don't know that, like, I honestly think the panic oftentimes ends up being just sort of the initial reaction to things. Mm-hmm. Like, there's all this panic. And I think this is just over the course of history of sports, right? Like, when there's massive changes, like I don't know what it was like when they added the 3-point line to basketball, but did people get up in arms about that? Like, oh, you're changing the game. Like, I just think whenever there's massive change in sport, people are going to not love it, and they're going to freak out about it, and they're going to try to think about, oh my God, what does this mean for the life of our sport, and long term, what are all these different things saying about where the sport is going and who has the power and all this different stuff. But I think at the end of the day, like, I think what's changing in college football is good for the sport overall, because it's giving a lot of the power back to the players, where they now have some say, and they're getting a cut of some of the money that they should be seeing, and they're at least allowed to make money now. I also think the transfer portal gives guys an opportunity to find a situation sometimes that's better for them. Now, the transfer portal can be a blessing and a curse, which is another thing we've hit on before, because sometimes guys get bad advice and they go into the portal and then they realize, I shouldn't have done this, and they want to go back to the place that they were, and there's not always an opportunity there. So there is, this is where I say, like, I do think there needs to be some governance, in terms of how things are sort of just like how things are controlled, whether it's the portal, whether it's how much NIL money can be sort of doled out, different things like that. But I also don't want to cap how much a player can make and cap a player. Like, I thought it was always stupid that a kid couldn't transfer without having to sit out a year. Like, that type of stuff is dumb. So it's about finding that balance. I don't have all the answers. I don't think Greg Sankey and Tony Petiti have all the answers. Like, I think that's the whole point of this committee, is coming together to sort of answer those questions to figure those things out. But I think ultimately, like the game is growing and it's only going to get bigger. I don't always get the outrage over over a lot of these different things, other than the fact that it's changing the game and changing the things that people love. I mean, even with the coaches going to the NFL, there's always going to be coaches willing to stay at this level. It's just how it's going to be.
So I think anything that keeps college football as a national story is a good thing, inevitably, because the reason why the NFL is king is their ability to extend. Listen, there's a, there's an Ouroboros effect here of the snake chasing its own tail and eating its own tail.
Yeah.
The NFL is so popular, which allows it to expend its schedule to 12 months of importance, which then makes the NFL more popular. So but I think you got to start. Like, I do think the college football playoff conversation, I think the transfer portal, I think realignment, I think it is a good thing for college football. And part of that is the constant reaction, keeping it in the news cycle of the panic of people in high profile, like we talked about with Herbie last week. I'll also say, like, there is a part of me that I think there's been a lot of talk and not enough action. And so I see this a lot in politics of there's a lot of rabble rousing, but when it comes down to let's work together, let's fix the problems that we do have as a country, nobody really wants to do that, because fixing things does not begat there are no easy solutions. Two, no one's ever going to be 100% happy. And three, if all the problems go away, then all your wedge issues go away. And all of a sudden, nobody, like, listen, it's tough to get elected, reelected, newly elected if everybody's pretty happy. So I say that to say, when it comes to college football, if the Big Ten, SEC, if this joint advisory committee is about finally doing something, amen, hallelujah. I might not like it, but at least I'll respect you doing something. But there's been so much rabble that it feels like people are doing that because they don't have the balls, the power, or the creativity to fix what's wrong.
Yeah.
That I do think inevitably is a lack of leadership. And I think that part of it is bad for college football.
Yeah.
And college athletics.
To your point, I just think that's the easy thing to say when there's all this movement and change happening, is just, well, I don't like it, and this is ruining the sport, without actually giving it a chance or without actually giving any constructive input into, okay, I get that things are changing. How can I? That's why I appreciate, like, Jim Harbaugh saying what he said at the college football playoff, where it was like, yeah, listen, like, I think that this is how you should do things. I think players should get a cut. I appreciate when Chip Kelly comes out and says, here's how it should be set up. 2 mega conferences, the South, or 4 conferences. The South plays the North plays the South. Then the Northwest plays the North-South, like South, or the Southwest. Jesus. But anyway,
and then the South-North plays the Middle East.
Sounds like I'm talking about a Civil War documentary or something over here. I mean, Jesus.
Plays Miami.
But no, I appreciate those inputs from coaches, because it at least tells me that these guys are trying to embrace the change. I'm gonna be honest, like, of all the things that are changing, I think the thing that has the biggest, that could be the biggest detriment to the sport, is if you really disrupt some of, like, the natural rivalries and things in the sport. Because I think the one thing that you can't completely disregard in that sport specifically is the tradition. I understand why, like, the NFL is king and it's very commercialized in a lot of ways, but it's still they do that to sort of bring in outside fans and all this. And college football wants that too. But the thing with college football is there's a reason that they have the biggest stadiums in football, because they're the bases that some of these programs are bigger than any NFL team, because there's truly, like, people who have gone to those schools, graduated, and they're like, this is my place. They feel a connection to that place. And that's even greater than me growing up in, the middle of Ohio and being like, I could cheer for the Browns, I could cheer for the Bengals, whatever. But you feel very connected to Columbus because it's right there, and maybe you went to school there, you have a family member who went to school there, whatever. So I think the tradition getting disrupted could have a bigger blow. Because I also think about it too, like we think about it very much from an Ohio State scope. And yeah, like nothing's going to happen with Ohio State, Michigan. You're never going to get rid of that game, even if it moves to earlier in the schedule or whatever. But I think you think about, like Oregon and Oregon State, right? That's a rivalry that for some area, that's like their Super Bowl every year. Like that's the game that they really look for. So you ruin that type of stuff. This is where you start alienating fan bases. This is where you start losing some of that. What makes college football great and fun is that sometimes there's these teams that aren't on that level, but they have this natural rival that's either like in state or really close to them, like Akron, Kent, even on a smaller level between in the MAC schools. It's like they're so close to each other. There's this rivalry there, and people get revved up for that game here locally in Northeast Ohio because of that. So I think that stuff matters more almost than the money and the changing tides of the transfer portal and guys not wanting to embrace that, and not recruiting not just being about the relationships, but being about how much you can get a guy or pay a guy. I think that matters less than, and all these changes that people are up in arms about matter less than some of the other things that I mentioned, which that's being impacted by this recent surge too. But I think if you can do your best to keep some of those things, there's a reason why Oklahoma and Texas are kind of migrating together to the SEC. I think that stuff is still going to largely be what drives the fuel and the passion behind college football.
All right, guys, do you think all this noise is good for college football? And you guys can leave the comments on the 92 The Fan YouTube channel. We do check them. We do interact with you guys. Or at Nick Wilson says, at Spencito _ on social media, including Instagram and, of course, X. But don't forget, new show. Follow the show everywhere you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app. Have I mentioned it's free? Also, 923thefan.com. Anywhere you get your podcast. We appreciate you. Spencer, good show. To you out there, we say thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. #GoBucks.